This is Weights and Wealth, your one-stop shop for entertaining education on building a stronger body and bank account.
We are not doctors or financial advisors and must warn you this is not medical or investing advice. It is for your entertainment. Welcome back to another episode of Weights and Wealth, your number one fitness, finance, faith, family, and freedom podcast. Today we'll be focusing on the Freedom F with the 4th of July coming up. So we'll be talking about the Bill of Rights and the amendments for this episode. And then in a week, we'll be talking about a book that we all read with some new proposed amendments, as well as a few that we came up with ourselves.
Yeah. It's going to be a really great episode. We're looking forward to doing this kind of extended series on the Constitution and, the Bill of Rights and, potentially the future, like the Federalist Papers, all sorts of, documents from the Founding Fathers that, discuss in depth the freedoms that are guaranteed to us by, the first generation of Americans. So for our shout out this week, we have Nick Freitas.
Potential future guest.
Potential future guest for giving good education on our Constitution and the rights guaranteed to us from God and, not from the government. And for, who knows, possibly being a listener. So shout out to Nick Freitas. Keep up the good work. And, looking forward to potentially meeting you once we finish our relocation to the Northern Virginia area.
Yeah, we're excited for this episode, as Nick and Sean both mentioned. The weights wisdom for this week is, Nick, if you could give us a front double bicep.
Of course.
They might be banning our guns, but they can't ban these cannons right here.
Touch.
Yeah, rock solid right there. So do your dips and chin-ups to build those arms. And coming soon, Sean kind of got into it. We're probably maybe going to do a series kind of like we did on education with the Bill of Rights. But today we're going to just do a quick overview. A lot of people may not have ever read the Bill of Rights or really heard all of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. So without further ado, Nick, you want to start us off reading the First Amendment?
Sure. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
Yes, this is really a catch-all, I guess, a basket of freedoms here. You got freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of the right of people to assemble, to protest. So something that's really important about this that's never been more apparent than right now, with recently members of Congress saying that these rights were given to us by the government and not from God. Well, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, I think it's pretty clear that these are unalienable rights that were given to us by our Creator. So it's very important that people understand that this is really what this is the foundation of America, and the freedoms that we enjoy. If we start to kind of trample over the First Amendment here, that takes away all of our freedom. So does someone want to get into some violations here?
Yeah, I don't know if if I came up with this or I read it somewhere, but the pen, they always say the pen is mightier than the sword, but in the same way, the reason that the First Amendment is so important is that in a free country, without government censorship and restriction of your ability to express yourself, you have the ability to make change without violence. Once you restrict the First Amendment, if you are a serious person and you are looking for serious change, your only option is violence.
That's an excellent point.
To achieve said change. So that it's not only that you care about, being able to say whatever you want and, exercising your religion and stuff like that, but if they take away that ability, the only way for you to achieve social change, whether it's civil rights or, even just economic legislation, like it's violence. That's the only other way to make yourself heard. And, if we continue down this road of, restricting our civil rights in this way, it's not going to end well. With the recent
another part of like the speech there is when you start to restrict free speech, you not only restrict speech itself, but you also alter people's thought processes, and it's really a restriction on the freedom to think. I think.
Well, that's exactly, 1984. That's the new speech. Is you limit people's vocabulary. Like, let's say you only know 1,000 words. There are concepts that we think of today, but if the word freedom or whatever it is does not exist in your vocabulary, you have no ability to.
It's like in North Korea where they don't show people a map of the entire world, I think.
But as far as violations, we have the recent FISA-related legislation, which essentially is incentivizing private corporations to censor speech. So there's not really a way of holding them accountable. So that stuff that was going on with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter prior to Musk taking over, and particularly during the 2016 election, and even prior to that, where the federal government, when I say the Fed, I mean the federal government, they were petitioning and like asking these companies to be like, hey, we don't really like this. Can you, kind of shadow ban it or take it down or whatever? And that was a request that the companies were complying with. But this legislation essentially gives the government the ability to direct them to do that. So it's, instead of it being a kind of symbiotic relationship, it's turning into a very top-down heavy government overreach, which is, in a way, Twitter is kind of the modern day public square, and particularly in our, more interconnected society. So if you can't, freely express yourself on Twitter or Facebook or any of these social media sites, it's kind of like being, banned from any type of public gathering back in the 17th century.
Yeah. I think another one we see around religion is kind of what's going on in public schools, because I feel like we're almost getting to the point where, atheism is the established religion, or some other ideologies that are getting, very big in public schools, depending on where you look. So, I mean, I personally think that it essentially has been established, and that's violating the Constitution.
I was going to mention that as well. Like what it says, I think people get confused about this here. No law respecting an establishment of a religion. So we say freedom of religion, right? We reduce this down to freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom to protest. But when you actually read it, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of a religion. So they're saying that we can't establish a religion and make a theocracy. They're not saying you can't have prayer in schools. Like there's a difference here that I think we lose when we reduce it just down to freedom of religion, freedom of speech. Having something like prayer in public areas isn't establishing Christianity or any other religion as the religion that everyone has to be a part of, or they'll be persecuted. But now when you see these other things going on, these other ideologies that are becoming religions really in public schools, if you don't respect it, then you are punished for it. So that is more of an establishment of religion than we actually used to see, I think, with having prayer in school.
It's kind of this odd, it's like reverse repression. Mm-hmm. It's like a lot of, it's kind of like the idea that it's like cancel culture in a way. It's not necessarily like, hey, this is the law, but it's like, there are certain ideas that are so forbidden that like you will no longer be a viable economic entity or like public person if you express them. And that's kind of the opposite of, what a free and open society should be. So that's kind of this underlying irony that is inherent in small L liberalism, is that liberalism itself is kind of the dominant ideology, and it won't tolerate, other, ways of looking at things. And that's part of, believing something, is that why would you believe it if you don't think it to be correct? That's kind of my personal problem with like ecumenism in general, like interfaith dialogue. It's like, oh, well, like if Judaism, Islam, and Christianity are all equally, valid, then what's the point of being any of them? It's like you either believe what you believe or not. But that's an aside. But it is just interesting that every single political system has some sort of intolerance built into it. It's nearly impossible to avoid.
And we can dive into the first one deeper when we do like the series on it. But
we should move on to
so the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Yeah. So looking at this, a lot of people will be like, oh, well, it's talking about the National Guard. It's talking about that stuff. Well, they simply don't have a basic understanding of grammar. So it says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. That there's a comma there. That comma separates the two ideas, right? The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's two ideas in that sentence. Maybe it was bad writing on the part of the Founding Fathers. Maybe they could have been more clear. But those are very, very clearly separate concepts. A well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Those are two separate concepts within that one clause. And a lot of, generally anti-gun people will try and conflate the two. And that's just an incorrect reading that ignores, one, historical context, two, basic grammar.
And before we get into, we're going to keep it short and try to move on between each of these. But before we get into gun control real quickly, I think something that's not really thought about with this is if you read A Breach of Trust, I think the author is Andrew Basovich.
Andrew Basovich.
He goes into how we never had really a standing army unless we were in wartime. In peacetime, we didn't have a standing army. When that happened and we got this volunteer standing army, the relationship between the citizens and the service members really changed. And it makes it so that, like, if you have a well-regulated militia, as it describes in the first part, necessary to the security of a free state, at that point, everyone is, or not really everyone, but the general population, it pulls from everyone to be a part of that. When you have this separation of citizens and service members, well, now there's this gap. And when people are constantly voting for these forever wars, for that they know that they won't serve in it because they're not part of the militia, it just creates this ideological gap, I think. What do you think, Sean?
I just finished the biography of John Adams by David McCullough, and great read. Highly recommend it to everybody. But that was one of the things that he combated during his presidency and during his political career, was the establishment of a standing army. Ironically, Washington wasn't in favor of it, but the real mastermind behind it was Alexander Hamilton. And what John Adams feared was that the establishment of this, military institution, like in a serious way, like on the continental United States, would essentially create, the military-industrial complex and, just this kind of like vested interest in war. And that was very different than the Navy that Adams was very, very in favor of, because that he viewed that as a defensive weapon, whereas a standing army sitting on the continent, what is the purpose of it if not to provoke conflict with whether it's the Spanish colonies in the south, the Native Americans to the west, or the Canadian British to the north? He viewed it as something that would only create further conflicts and give when it's like that saying of when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how he thought about the concept of a standing army. So
and moving over to the second part, the second idea in this amendment, right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I feel like that part is very clear. I think where the confusion comes into this is people just not knowing it, or not knowing it, but feeling as though their emotions and thinking around the situation justifies trampling over this amendment. The problem with that is that that's lawlessness. When you decide that you don't like a law, so you shouldn't follow it, like that becomes a problem very quickly for a society. Do we have anything else on gun control before we move on to the Third Amendment?
Yeah.
No, we could do. I mean, Nick, if you've got something,
it's quick.
I'm
I just want to make sure, because I've read this 15 times after you point out all the commas, and I just want to make sure that I got it right in my head. So could I reword it, and then you can tell me if I'm reading it right? Okay. Yeah. So I would say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed because a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. I would say like with the understanding of the people as the militia, that could be a correct interpretation of it. But obviously, with the modern military, it's a little different, and but at the same time, they're kind of entirely separate ideas in that,
Yeah, that's the part I'm getting confused about. The commas, I need to brush up on my grammar.
Yeah, I mean, so it's okay. We can move on to the third amendment.
The Third Amendment is no soldier shall, in a time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in a time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. That's a mouthful as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was something that came out of British troops being quartered in civilian housing and stuff like that. A British officer would kind of come in and be like, "Hey, we're commandeering your house as the new barracks for this platoon," or something like that. And that was pretty common practice back in the day. It's almost like that law back in biblical times when a Roman soldier could pretty much accost anybody and have them carry his pack for I think it was 5 miles. That was a law that the Roman Empire had, and this quartering practice by the British military was a very similar type of military coming in and just kind of taking civilians' private property and resources and using them for their own benefit.
Yeah, which I mean, I don't think this one is really violated much. I don't know who wrote about the draft, which I mean that could be. I could see the argument.
Yeah, I threw that in there. I just posed that as a question. Could the draft be considered a violation of the Third Amendment, since the military is essentially commandeering private persons who have no desire to be in the military? You know what I mean?
I feel like it's separate, but it's still a interesting argument to get into.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I think because it's very specific about being quartered in a house, taking somebody from their house isn't much better, but I don't think it violates this specially. So, but yeah.
That's fair. I mean, I could definitely see a highly educated and skilled lawyer being able to argue that the draft would be
sounds like Sean cut out, but Nick, you want to continue?
Yeah, we'll keep going. All right. The Fourth Amendment is the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized.
Yeah, this one, this might be the most trampled on. No. Yeah, I was going to say 10th. Yeah. But I mean, it's up there. Like, unreasonable search and seizure. Your data is constantly being searched and seized by the government. We could do a whole episode on the intelligence apparatus. So if you're interested in that, definitely let us know. But
just interesting, quick Google searches for anybody listening. The Patriot Act, Pegasus, and then the new FISA legislation. So just look into that and, open up 2 tabs, have the Fourth Amendment open, and then read about these different bills that have been passed.
And it's another example of classic government creep. Once you give them an inch, they take a mile. When you look at these FISA warrants, that's originally for foreign internationals, but they're extending it into domestic people. So,
all right, should we go on the 5th?
Yeah, let's. Unless someone wants to talk about no-knock raids.
I mean, that was just one violation I saw. I mean,
that's just pretty blatant. Like, everybody knows about no-knock raids.
All right.
All right. The Fifth Amendment is no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service, in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation.
So there's a lot here.
These are hard for me to read because they're all one sentence.
I think the Fifth Amendment is most notably known to the average citizen as pleading the Fifth Amendment and not having to incriminate yourself. Not having to incriminate yourself. But there's so much more here. I guess, Sean, pick any one, and maybe we can pick one, and then we'll move on for time purposes.
Yeah. So I'll go with the last one. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation.
That's what I wanted.
So I would argue that eminent domain, there's never been a person affected by eminent domain that has been adequately compensated. The fact that that's probably my one disagreement with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is they should have just left off those last 3 words. It should be, nor shall private property be taken for public use. Period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the without just compensation left open this massive loophole that has been abused over centuries, whether it's Eisenhower building the highways and digging up graveyards and destroying the entire neighborhoods for that to happen, or just some dude who made a deal with the local politician and now some poor farmer just lost half his land because they want to build a strip mall there, or some new public works project, power plant, stuff like that. So of violations, I would say that is probably my pet peeve with this.
I think that's the biggest one. Eminent domain is just such a clear. I don't know if there's a more clear violation than that. Nick, you got anything else on this one?
Yeah, I would just say the one part, like Sean wants those last 3 words out, which I agree with. I would clarify when you can be deprived of life, just because I think that is allowing the government to take somebody's life is a pretty big deal. And I think it should only be used in dire circumstances. So I think I think that word should have more clarification, but
yeah, I see what you're saying there.
all right. The Sixth Amendment is, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sean?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I mean, essentially what this boils down to, yes, it's a lot of text, but essentially, if you're accused of a crime, you shall be told what crime that is, and you will be judged by an impartial jury of your peers from the district that crime was committed in, and you shall have the right to a speedy trial. And so any type of indefinite confinement before the trial is unconstitutional. And the example I put in there is, the January 6th defendants. I'm not defending what happened on January 6th, but these are American citizens. Their rights are being violated under the Constitution due to this indefinite imprisonment that has been going on in the DC area for a long time, where these men and women have been held without trial, quote unquote pending trial, but they still have not gone to court. So they've just been essentially rotting in a jail cell for years now.
Yeah. I don't have much to add to that. I think it's pretty explanatory. The one thing I would say is the right to a speedy and public trial. It's not their fault that the government operates the way it does, but knowing the government, they're going to operate very slowly in most cases. So I don't know how you would improve the justice system to work faster. The J6 is a different scenario, but in most cases, trials take forever. But I don't know how you speed that up with all the bureaucracy that's in place, and there's always going to be that bureaucracy in the government.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be red tape, and then you think about the legal process, and that's just almost the private version of government bureaucracy and regulation and red tape and reading between the lines and the small print coming out to bite you. It's a lengthy process, and I'm sure anyone who's a lawyer, if you are a lawyer and listening to this and you would like to give some more input on why trials often take so long, please do. To me, if I was the one in charge of this, I think it might be interesting to how the police have to have X amount of evidence to arrest you. I think that if you want to be brought to trial or something, the justice system should also have all the documentation ready to go when you're brought in. Mm. You know what I mean? That there just needs to be more coordination so that it's not lawyers building a case. It should be the lawyers for the prosecution have their case built, and then maybe you get a 2-week period where, yes, you're held and your defense builds their case, using the deposition.
Yes, putting timelines in place essentially to speed it up.
Yes, and not just we're arresting this guy for X crime, and we'll decide the trial date later.
Yeah.
I don't think
the Seventh Amendment, which we're getting to, has a specific, and I think it's the only one in the Bill of Rights that really gets this specific.
Yeah.
But the Seventh Amendment is, in suits at common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise reexamined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. So I just thought the $20 was funny because I think it's the only one in the Bill of Rights that gets that specific. But I don't know. Do you guys have anything to say about it?
No.
Yeah. Okay. Move on to the 8th.
Yeah.
All right. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted.
All right. So, Ted, I think did you have the first bullet, or was that you?
That was mine. Yeah, I just think I do consider the death penalty cruel. I mean, a lot of these people believed in God. I assume that they believe in God's forgiveness of people, and to not allow that person as much time to repent as possible, I think is very cruel. So
that's a very good way to word that. With giving people time to repent.
I mean, I think that I don't think it's unusual punishment. You know what I mean? It's
true.
It is. It could be considered cruel, but when we're talking about crimes that warrant the death penalty, oftentimes the crime committed is far crueler and far more unusual than being summarily executed.
I guess it does say cruel and unusual, not cruel or unusual.
Yes.
Although what's unusual, that is very subjective, and that can change with time. What's that?
Drawing and quartering.
Feathering.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, that was usual at a time.
Getting canceled.
Right. And that's usual now. You know? So that changes over time. But
yeah.
I would agree. And then as far as the excessive fines imposed, why? Like, how do we designate excessive? They really should have, or there really should be a percentage on it, whether it's total net worth or based on average annual income.
Yeah.
So that that way you're not having some guy who stole a car or something. And, he's a one-time offender, but his bail is $50,000. And then you just put him farther down, the path of petty crime, because now he has to pay back the bail, the bail company, essentially. He took out a loan against his freedom. So I'm not advocating for, no bail or, whatever like ridiculous policies that California has. But I do think like bail should generally be reasonable and have a fixed percentage or average that is imposed to prevent it from being something that can be abused and potentially create just only more crime when people get into even worse economic conditions because of it.
All right, should we move on to number 9? All right. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. I think they just had this as a catch-all, like unalienable rights. Like, you may have forgotten about things, but that doesn't mean you don't have them.
It's kind of like when you're going to confession and you're like, Father, like, please forgive me of any other sins that I don't remember.
Yep, exactly.
You're kind of like, it's like an insurance policy. But you gotta like this one, like I couldn't, it's kind of like not knowing what you don't know, like how do we come up with a violation of this? Like, because it's essentially saying that if these powers are not explicitly given to the government, you have the right to do it. You know what I mean? Or it's not explicitly prohibited by essentially the Constitution.
Yeah, I'm curious if this amendment has ever been like, or how often it's cited in like court cases, just because it is so vague.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
Moving on to number 10.
Yeah,
I would like to
move on to the last one. It might be a little bit longer.
All right. The 10th Amendment is the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. What?
Outline.
Oh, yeah. So I wrote the states need to start prohibiting more bullshit because there's a lot of stuff that they let the federal government do.
The system of America is federalism. So we have the federal government and we have the states. The states are supposed to be essentially like more powerful in terms of how much they legislate than the federal government. What the large federal government has turned into is like the supreme legislator and executor, and the states don't really have the power that they were supposed to have. And that's dangerous if you just look back at an example that we cite all the time, COVID. Like, the states are supposed to have the right to make their own policy and their own laws, and the federal government isn't supposed to make laws for things that weren't given to them in the Constitution. This is why Roe v. Wade was overturned, which, however you feel about abortion, Roe v. Wade was overturned because it's a state's right to make that determination. It's not the federal government's right.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of things have, come down to states' rights. Past, some people will make arguments about the Civil War, might not be right. But essentially the point of the 10th Amendment is that the states are supposed to be able to fight back. And since the federal government has expanded so rapidly and widely, and generally state level leadership has been rather apathetic about, their approach, because most people view state government as kind of a stepping stone to the federal level. So a lot of, state level legislators are not willing to, I guess, step on any toes in Washington because they want to be there one day. Not many state level politicians are gung-ho Louisianans or Californians. They view whether it's that state senator spot or state rep or governor as a stepping stone to the federal House, the federal Senate, and the presidency. That's how they see it. They see themselves as minor league when really we should be looking at the states and the federal government as the AFC and the NFC. That's how it should be.
Wow, Sean making a football reference. This is shocking.
I know.
And because the NFC has a lot more power than the AFC does, right? I mean, they have the Packers and Eagles, so.
But yeah, I mean that's a really good way to look at it. It shouldn't be this hierarchy we have right now where the federal government is in charge of everything and the states just kind of ask for permission to do things when they want.
So do you guys think the two should be equal? Because I always kind of thought the states should have more power, but
yeah, I mean that goes back into the political parties at the time.
That's kind of the problem that's the problem they ran into with the Articles of Confederation, was that there was not enough. So it's a very, very fine balance between the powers of the states and the powers of the federal government. And we ran into the issue before the Constitution establishing the current federal government under the Articles of Confederation, because there was not enough central authority to keep things orderly and together. But now we have the opposite problem of way too much authority and way too much abuse at the centralizing power. So if you could reset the clock to square one and maybe make some more explicit articles within the Constitution prohibiting the federal government from doing particular things, you might see it pan out better.
Which we can do. The Constitution allows us to make amendments. So this is what we'll be getting into next week. We can make more amendments that will limit the power of the federal government and bring that balance back into order and give us a lot of our freedoms back.
Mm-hmm.
So be sure to tune in next week, and we look forward to further discussing Mark Levin's book, The Liberty Amendments.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us today at Weights and Wealth. And don't forget to apply today's lessons to live healthy and wealthy.
If this conversation will contribute to your fitness and financial gains, please share it with a friend or family member and give a 5-star review so more people can lift bigger weights and get bigger bank accounts.